unexpected. So I really warmly welcome now Matina Agio. She is an inheritance consultant based in Greece, and she helps her clients to go through this process, this inheritance process, and transform it to something good. So Matina, maybe you can just start with sharing about, I think it's important to learn about your history to understand why your history led to the work you do today.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you all for joining me today. It will be my pleasure to share a little bit about my perspective on this amazingly complex subject called inheritance. Well, when you ask me about my story, I just want to pull away from the screen a moment and say, when we ask about our story, basically we're asking about what have we focused on? You see, when we're working with people, we're working with their stories, and their stories are created by what they choose to focus on. Many things happen in our life, but in the end, we choose those pieces and we decide to put this together and say, this is how my story is. And when I work with people, I realize that we're definitely working with stories, but we're also working with chosen stories. So I will share with you what I have chosen to be my story, because that's very important. We have that choice of what we're going to leave out, what we're going to focus on, what we're going to magnify. So when the story comes up and says, I wasn't loved, I was treated unfairly, as opposed to, I feel very lucky and very grateful in my life, the story might be just the same. Mm-hmm. And so I decided many years ago that Matina's story was going to be a story of triumph, of happiness, of success, of valuing, and so on. And I actually want to begin with something that was quite tragic that happened when I was about 2.5 years old. Tragic in the sense that there was in the late 1960s a coup d'etat in Greece. And for several years, the country was in a dictatorship. My father, when I was about 2.5, was on the blacklist. And a lot of people left the country, like Mikis Theodorakis and Melina Mercouri. Maybe you don't know these people. I'm sure you know Melina Mercouri, because she was like with, very famous actress and so on. My father suddenly had to leave the country because he was notified that his life is in danger. Mm-hmm. So one day he went to work, and the same afternoon, he left for Canada, because that was the easiest exit he could, his way out. So he ended up in Montreal with a trench coat and $1,000, and he began his life there. And eventually, after many, many months, my family followed, leaving everything behind, my mother, my sister, and I, and we ended up in Canada. But the gap in between, which was many months where I suddenly did not see my father anywhere, and you can imagine for a small child, this was a very insecure feeling. Mm-hmm. And I was quite sort of pleasantly surprised to then see him suddenly appear after so many months. Mm-hmm. And that somehow confirmed something in me, that things disappear, but they reappear. Okay. So somehow this has been impressed inside of me. And so just a couple of weeks later, he took me to the nursery, and he said to me at the door, Matina, you're going to go and you're going to start school now, and everything will be beautiful. And in the afternoon, I'll come to pick you up. And I remember thinking to myself, is this man going to come and pick me up, or is he going to disappear again for another 6 months? And he was looking at me straight in the, and I thought, I think I'll trust this one. He did reappear, so he probably will reappear again. So this was an interesting value that was transmitted to me about how you can really depend on things, even if they seem to go away and come back. You don't know how that will evolve. So I decided to create a position of trust in my life. And this was a small experience, but for a child, it was a big experience, you know. And then I also saw my parents start from scratch in a new country with basically nothing, where we used to sleep in cardboard boxes for some months because there was no furniture. And I remember my father making the yogurt just by himself from the milk, because the yogurt represented his culture.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. He was from an Arcadian village. He started his life from an Arcadian village, which has basically Spartan, it's a Spartan land in Greece, Arcadia. And they made yogurt. And for him, making that yogurt tapped him into his resources, into his roots, you know. So as I saw my parents evolving throughout the years, I noticed that they were very rooted in their culture. They were very rooted in their values, and I didn't feel like they were longing or lacking anything, even then they had the challenges that they had. Now, I also know that my parents also spoke English and French. My mother had studied in Lausanne. She studied fine arts. So she was very adapted to cold weather, and she adapted very easily with her French. And my father had a Stoic background. He was in the Greek resistance. He had also served jail for 3 years during, you know, difficult political years. So he was a very resilient person. And so what came to me through this, and I'm saying this because our parents influence us in so many ways, that at the end of it, when they ended up passing away, about 60 days apart, where I lost them both, I realized that actually I didn't really lose anything, because what they left behind was so valuable that I did not have any time to grieve, because I had to process all of that which they left me behind. And what they left me behind was not tangible, it was intangible.
Okay. Just to ask, so when they passed away, where have you been? Still living in Canada, or?
No, we had moved back to Greece.
Okay.
And yes, we had moved back to Greece, and I had, after we moved back to Greece, when the Socialist Party came into power in the late 1980s, my father was had taken over one of the major banks and so on. But I left then as an 18-year-old. I left. I went to study in London. I went to Paris. I studied interior design and heritage management and so on. And so when I came back to Greece eventually as an adult, I then that is when they passed away.
Okay. Okay. So, and this or the passing away of your parents somehow led you to the work you do today. So
that's right.
What happened there, or what was the situation for you what was the inheritance situation for you? How old have you been there? Where are you?
So I was in my mid 50s. I was actually in my menopausal years, and there were a lot of shifts going on with me. And my parents, my mother suddenly died, who was the major householder, let's say, and she was also a collector of Greek heritage, of fine art, and so she also was a bohemian. So she never registered anything. We had antiquities among books. It was just a big chaos when I found it. And it took me about 2 years to sort this all out. And I realized that this is something that that I would have loved someone to help me with, because it was overwhelming. It was, and also because we ended up, because the house was a historic home, we ended up opening it to the public. It became a sort of house museum. I had to curate the things, but I also had to curate my family history, because I had to then open this to the public. So this process was very intense, because I had to understand I'm like let's say, I'm a steward, where I have to understand what is going to come through and what is going to be left behind. Because in all of our family stories, there are things that you don't want to transfer to your children. But in actual fact, you're transferring them through your way of being, because it's an epigenetic thing that you transfer things without wanting to. But let's just talk about the conscious aspect. The conscious aspect that I made decisions about what is going to come through and what is going to stay behind. And this was very important because we are all curators of our family history and what comes to us and how we're going to process that. So I had to work with all this, and then it took me another 10 years to process all of that. And I was involved in heritage management. I opened the home to the public. There were a lot of events going on and things like that. And one night I had a dream, and this was in my midlife. And I had the goddess Estia. Estia is a sort of like an invisible goddess in the pantheon.
Yeah.
She's the goddess of the home, of the hearth. She's a very subtle goddess. And she came to me and she said, she brought me this golden chest, and my ancestors were sort of on it, sculpted on it with gems. And she said to me, "You have opened your chest, Matina. Now it's time to help others open theirs."
Okay.
And I woke up, and the whole concept of the inheritance muse, which I'd like to share with you now in this stream, came to me. And I don't know if I'm sharing it. Yes.
Yes, that works. Yes, I can see it.
And then I realized that what I'm sitting on is something very precious, which I'd like to share with others. I'd like them to open their chest. I want them to value what they've received, because only in valuing what we receive can we actually manage, optimize it, and, create value from it. Because inheritance is a catalyst. And many times in this inheritance process, we lose the value. So I founded the Inheritance Muse, and basically the work involves helping people manage their things, things that they inherit. And this could be physical or non-physical. I help them manage their collections, or what could be a collection. I help them declutter and sort out their things. And I say this because very often we're in an age where we are inheriting things, but at the same time, we have not decluttered our own things. So there's more coming in. So it's a catalytic phase. Sometimes we have not sorted out our own things, and then we have to take on the things of our parents and so on. It's also, I also help people with their succession management, in how will they leave things, with what spirit, do they believe that their inheritors will honor and value and sustain what they have? So it could be a transfer of a recipe, or it could be a transfer of a business. It doesn't matter. It's, all the same. I also help people optimize their estates for more commercial use, so that they can actually sustain it and save it, whether it's a wine producer, or it's a historic home, or whatever they want to save and salvage instead of selling it, because they have to sell it and so on. And I also help people manage their life story, so that they can understand where they fit in the timeline of their family's legacy. So it has a lot of emotional content, and we're dealing very often with stories. It's very large.
Matina, to understand your work, or you probably share it now, but the people, they come, so you work with normally with individuals that have inherited something and they don't know how to deal with it. So
yes. So basically, yes, I work one-to-one. Sorry, the phone is ringing. I can't.
Don't worry.
It'll stop. So I work one-to-one. I don't work with groups like you do. I don't mediate. I work with the individual. Usually the individuals are between their 40s and their 50s. So this is a critical personal time always. Sometimes it's a foreseeable inheritance that's going to come. Other times it is an inheritance that is going to be transmitted. So the parent may contact me. And I work with many aspects which are beyond the legal and the financial. They're the psychological, emotional, sentimental, sorting out things with siblings. It has to do with working with a key strategy, masterminding the whole process. And we also work very often with life purpose, because if we don't know where you are, you're in the middle of it. If you don't know who you are, what is meaningful and valuable to you, you cannot solve anything.
Okay, so the people maybe come to you and have a valuable art collection from they inherited from the parents, and they don't know. I mean, they don't know what is the questions they ask then.
Okay, so when it has to do with collection, sometimes we own things, but we don't know how to value them, especially if there are no stories involved with them. They're just objects, which we've seen also that people tend to give away objects when there's no story or no sentimental value.
Okay.
Even though there might have been some very big sentimental value to parents, that's why I always encourage parents to share about the things they love in their home with their children and give them their perspective, because objects are also carriers of legacy, and they're carriers of family history. So it's very important that we know what is meaningful to our parents and what it meant to them, you know.
Okay.
And in terms of collections, what we do is we help create value with collections, because an appraiser can come and give you value, but things are always within a context. So we can work with a collection and add value to it by either adding pieces or adding history to the collection.
Yeah.
Some people have collections without even understanding that they do.
Yeah.
And I think that curating the things that you own, whether you want to sell them or not, is very valuable, because you create value in this way. Some people decide to sell them or not. I also work with large estates, and the problem with large estates is that they tend to decay. For example, in France, there's a lot of decaying castles and manor houses, which the owners, burdened with high taxes, don't know how to come clear with that, especially there's a co-inheritors involved and so on. So what we try to do is we try to get to the essence of the matter.
Okay.
And then we look at the numbers and the legalities.
Okay, so I understand you probably focus your work very much on defining the history of the heirlooms that the people get. So you, as you told at the beginning, you very much try to establish a common history about these goods together with your clients. Okay.
Yes, and we also try to understand where they are in their life and what has meaning to them. And you know, the interesting thing is that I have a term which I say life closure by design. After 40, 50, we need to understand that we're not going to live forever. And then we need to set a priority straight. So if we have an inheritance coming in, we have to understand where we are in our life, where we want our life to go, where we want to put our energy. Are we going to put our energy in fighting the rest of the co-inheritors years on end in a legal process? Is that worth our time?
Okay.
Or maybe it is worth our time because we strongly believe that this has to happen. But unless we set our own priorities straight and we understand who is behind the decision making, which is us, and what do we really want? How do we want to allocate our resources, our time, our energy, our money? That's the basic decision. Okay,
so it's twofold. So on the one side, we need to establish the history of the heirlooms that we receive, and on the other hand, we need to understand whether that fits in our personal life.
Exactly. We have to give the story to the inheritance. We have to connect with the inheritance in a way that's meaningful for us. And this inheritance could be a family business. It could be a family estate. We have to establish, first of all, what we want. Okay. It is our end goal.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I understand that. And you said you mentioned the special process you have developed over the years.
Yeah.
So what?
So it's the inheritance news method.
Yeah.
It comes from my life experience and my love for Greek philosophy, because whatever answer I've searched for in my life, I will always find it in Greek philosophy.
Okay.
And this is something that my father taught me, because he always quoted Greek philosophy, whatever was happening. Like, for example, when I was having a problem when I was young, he would say to me, Matina, it doesn't matter what is happening. What matters is how you perceive what is happening. So this was like from Epictetus, who was a Stoic philosopher. It's about how we perceive things. So it's the process is that we, first of all, I separate the process in the three-part work. One of them has to do with our ethos. It means who we are, what are our values, and how we see ourselves. It has to do with our ethos. Okay, Aristotle talks about this in his rhetoric. Then we look at what we want, what we're passionate about, which is our pathos. That's what we call it, pathos. And what are we worried about? What do we fear about? Because many times behind our action, there is a fear.
Yeah.
So we have to address, what are we worried about? That our siblings are going to take it over and we won't have a say? Are we worried that this castle is going to fall apart and it will go to ruin? Are we worried that we're going to become bankrupt through this inheritance? There's so many worries, subtle worries behind things. And therefore we address these issues, in a systematic way. And then there is the logos aspect, which Aristotle also talks about. And that is basically, what are the facts around this? The legalities, the taxes. We cannot ignore the facts surrounding an inheritance. And, but I have to tell you the following, is that this is the last thing we look at. Most people look at the facts first. We look at it last, and I'll tell you why. Because the way we will perceive something, that is what it will be to us.
Yeah.
So in a family business, if we perceive aggressors in that family business, this is what we will experience, and this is what we will then have to deal with. If our perception changes, then we'll deal with it in a different way. So the logos aspect is ephemeral, I would say.
Yes.
Though it seems very concrete, in essence, it is not concrete. What's concrete is our perception of the situation.
Yes, I have there a similarity to you. When I work with families defining how they shall pass on ownership, they often come to me because they have a dispute about contracts, but the contract is not, it's not the point, because they don't have a common opinion or created a common vision for the future. And so afterwards, if you have that, to finalize a contract, it's easy. But to go first is, how did you say, to define the ethos and pathos in your work?
Pathos, yes.
This is very important, I think. Okay.
Yeah, and the logos will come last.
Okay, this is the structure you put up and you go through with your clients. Okay, I understand. I understand it much better now. Are there any questions from the audience so far? You can just join when you have any questions. Okay. Matina, you wanted to show us another slide?
No? Well, I did. I'm just wondering where it is. Hold on, because I'm new at slides. So one more. Yes, I'd like to just begin this conversation. I don't know if you know Rana Maria Rilke, who's one of my favorite poets. And he says, believe in a love that is being stored up for you like an inheritance, and have the faith that in this love there is a strength and a blessing so large that you can travel as far as you wish without having to step outside it. I find this very interesting and very useful if we are to look at an inheritance situation from the point of gratefulness And the point of that, this is a gift given. We are in the honorable position to receive a gift. And no matter what form it is, it's a blessing in disguise. And that how we handle it is so important. And the most important thing is we can enter the inheritance with this blessing. And this will transform the way we see everything, the players in the theater, our co-inheritors, the problems of a company. All of this can transform when we put these glasses on, when we see that from this perspective. You know, what do you think about that, Sonia, in your experience?
You know, I think it's a very nice picture also to have this amount of love behind you. As you mentioned, you know, you have the family roots behind you which pass on love and energy to the next generation. I feel that somehow, you know, it's difficult for family members that had a conflict between themselves, between other family members, or family members who just don't know how to deal with a certain, who feel inheritance more as a burden, you know. So sometimes, as you say, it's a perception, but I think sometimes I see very much, or many family members suffering from this also as a burden, and inherited burden. They would like to get or to feel free. So sometimes I very much like your picture, and I hope that I would wish that all the family members could see that as well. But I think many family members consider it also as a burden what they receive.
Yes, inheritance is a gift, and we are in the position to receive. We are the receivers. What we do with this gift is up to us. We can throw it in the trash. We can feel unlucky with it. We can make our own versions of what this inheritance is to us, but it is something that can add value to our life, and we have to manage it in a good way. And this needs wisdom, it needs patience, it needs understanding, and most of all, it needs understanding of ourselves. Because we need, in order for us to be good stewards of what we receive, whether it's a company or a house or whatever it could be, or we have to know ourselves better. And the inheritance challenges us in that form. And the other thing that I wanted to add here is that there's another term that I came up with because I feel this happens so often, and I call it wealth dyslexia. Many people are wealth dyslexic. They do not understand the value of what they have, what they're receiving, and they have a general sense of lack. And it is this perception that they greet the world. I was not treated correctly. My siblings got more. My parents didn't really love me as much as I wanted to. Life wasn't good to me. All sorts of things that we tell ourselves. But even more than that, one of the biggest factors of wealth dyslexia for me is that we think that inheritance is a physical thing, but it's also a non-physical thing. It's what we call intangible inheritance. And I'm not talking about titles here, deeds and things. I'm talking about the wealth that comes to us through our parents, through our ancestors, and is in our DNA. It is in the experience that we have. It is in the values that we were given. It is the fact that we can turn on the water and clean water comes out. This is valuable. And we do not value what we have. Perhaps when we lose it, we do, but we do not value the things that have come to us. And we always think, we did a survey recently to people, what do they define as inheritance? And the definition was, inheritance is something that comes to us after a parent or a relative dies. And this is such an Ankh corset version of what inheritance is, you know?
I feel that very much when you talk. So what do you think shall happen between the generation, you know, or what do they need to discuss, you know, or how could like people, or yes, mothers and fathers, what do they need to discuss with their children about inheritance? What would you recommend to them?
Okay, the strongest thing that you need to discuss with your children comes through your action and not your words. I really want to express this because your actions teach so much to your successors. That's the first thing. And then, of course, your words. What I would say is that you share with them your life experiences, your why you do things, your raison d'être, what's behind what you do. And not necessarily in teaching them, but in sharing. Share them why you love this painting. Tell them what's really meaningful for you in this business. Share with them also your fears. The more you share, the more value will come out of that. And the things will be salvaged in a better way, you know? Right. So this is very important for the people who are giving something further. Also, the generations need to speak to each other and they need to share their values. And what I've noticed is that the patriarchs and the matriarchs of businesses, for example, have a certain way of doing things and their values are more or less in place. And the younger generation also has values, but it seems like these are conflicting values. But if you look further down the line, like, you know, at the end of the train line, you know, the train tracks, you will see that they actually join. And it's very important to find this meeting point. Because the older generation may be talking about philanthropy, the younger generation may be also talking about philanthropy, but they are saying it in a different way. So I think the role of a mediator is very, very important in these processes, because they need to start understanding each other, especially when a lot of things are at stake.
Yes, so I feel very much the same. You know, when I work with families, I think the first when they talk about succession or who should represent the family in the board of directors, whatever, they need to first align on the goals and the values, and then afterwards it's much easier to also to define the more technical things, whether who shall represent the family in the board, etc. I think it's very important to do this work, and yeah, I think that's very true. Maybe there, as we are a cultural or intercultural audience, do you see certain cultural differences in you know, in the approach to deal with inheritance?
Well, I work mainly with Western-minded people. I don't have an experience with Asian cultures or cultures where women are not that valued.
Okay.
I have difficulty with that.
Yeah.
But I work all over the world, and I would say that there is a common understanding. So I wouldn't say that there are main differences, because the key point is the person. It doesn't matter if you're in a you know, a Japanese family or if you're in a Western family. What's important, because we're working with individuals, is to focus on what they want and how they can maneuver within whatever structure they're given. Okay. So I would say that I think the human experience is a common experience, and the things that we worry about and we're passionate about are quite common in most nationalities.
Okay. So when we go back also again a little bit focus on the process, maybe what shall we do first? You know, step by step. What is the idea? If you could give us some advice, what is a step-by-step plan?
Okay, so as I said to you, I work with individuals, and I can work with various individuals in a family. I won't put them together though, because that's something, you know, maybe you do, but I don't do that. I help them figure out first and foremost what they want and how they envision the situation ideally, because we have to go to the heart of the matter. And when we go to the heart of the matter, sometimes we discover that they're not sure about what they want, or maybe what they're doing is not actually what they want. So because they're taking everything from outside, what is happening outside pragmatically to them, they think that these are facts that are fixed forever. But actually, we are changing our reality all the time as we think it through. And the forerunner, of course, is our unconscious. We will go towards situations which our unconscious will draw us to, and we will confirm our beliefs and assumptions of the world, even in the inheritance process. So if it's a company, if it's a family company which has to be dealt with, I would like to learn a little bit more about the history of what has been going on. We have to look at what is happening. And then we, as I said, we have to focus on where the matter is, where the value is. Because actually inheritance is the transfer of value from one generation to the other. That should be the ideal state of inheritance. It should not be the depreciation of value. Even if estates or properties or even companies depreciate, the value can continue going through because we have the intangible value coming through. And this is not so susceptible to economic crises, pandemics. These are values which are being transferred, strengths and understandings of the world, no matter what happens. So we should focus on that. And what we want is an overall good experience for all members. We are focused on the best possible outcome. And we need to know what that is.
Okay. So you define a goal together with the family members. Exactly,
but first of all, the personal goal.
Yeah.
A bit of retrospect into the meaning, the relationship with the inheritance, and then we move on to what do we want.
Okay.
What do we want to happen, and what are we prepared to let go?
And there are sometimes family members. For example, my family members of a company, they have, or at the one point in their time, they feel the need to sell the company or sell some heirlooms. Do you consider that as a, how do you say, is that allowed in your kind of thinking? Because you said you pass on the values. So is it allowed? Are we allowed to sell something that that was a value for our parents, but maybe not for us? So how do you deal with this situation?
I'm a minimalist by nature, so the less the better. But that which you keep, you have to focus and give it value. You have to be a good steward of it. On the other hand, I also see that people do not value things because they don't understand them.
Okay.
For example, I have a client who comes from a multi-generational business, going down to the late 17th century from Germany. And she left, she went to New Zealand to get away from that. Even though she grew up in this, the family business fed her, gave her the ability to study, gave her the financial freedom, and yet she did not want to go near it because there was a patriarch in the middle, So she left, leaving it behind her. But then the patriarch died and she had to come back. And that's why I say that inheritance is a catalyst, because even though as far away as we can go away from our story, our truth, our family, we always somehow have to come back and resolve it and process it and make a decision about what will happen. So this is exactly what happened. She had to come back. And through the process, she realized that she actually wants to take part of that company on. Even though it was clear that when she came to me, she was, let me get away from this. How am I going to cut out of this? And in the end, she and her brothers decided to work together for the business. And the relationship with the brothers wasn't the ideal either.
Okay.
But understanding the value of that company for her, because it had to come to her measure. It wasn't about how great the company is. Once she found her relationship, then the process started and solutions started coming.
So this is the last point I wanted to discuss with you. Sometimes it really happens that your parents did something to you that really hurt you. So how can you, I mean the topic of forgiving your parents or your ancestors or your siblings, I don't know. It's very important to somehow be able to forgive the other party. So how do you deal with that concept? I mean, is that something you can do on your own after a death of a person, or how does that work in your work?
Well, if we talk about forgiveness, We can only forgive out of a position of fullness. We cannot forgive out of a position of lack.
Okay.
Okay.
What does that mean?
So this means that we have to understand ourselves as whole in order to forgive. And actually, forgiving is not in a deeper sense. Forgiving is not about you did something bad to me and you hurt me. So, but I'm going to let it go. I'm generous enough to let this go so that we don't both suffer. That's not my version of forgiveness. My version of forgiveness has to do with a larger picture of understanding. And in actual fact, no one is forgiving anybody.
Okay.
Nothing happened. Everything that happened, it depends on what you do with what happens. So there could have been abuse. There could have been problems. We are not here to forgive abuse or problems. We are here to take that experience and transform it into something that's meaningful and powerful for us, and hopefully help us add value to the world. And we have many stories in history where people have been trampled upon, abused in thousands of ways, and they have turned that pain around into giving. And you can only give through a position of fullness. And so I'm not saying that we're going to say thank you to abuse. No, no, no. But we will say, I was there at that moment. This is what happened. And now what do I decide to do with it? I have to release the abuser. I have to release the villain. Because if I don't, I don't have free. My hands are not free. I'm tied down with anger, grief, whatever. So forgiveness is actually an act of generosity to your freedom.
To yourself. So
yourself.
So you have to you have to like somehow detach, the conflict or from the person, or how you can do it on your own. You said
you can do it. You can ask help, therapy, whatever. But I'm not against therapy. But many times I think we dwell too much in the pain. And coming from a Stoic father, he'd never dwelled too much in the pain, and he never allowed me to do that either. He said, you have one cry and then it's over. Because if you don't let it go, you are bound. You are not free. Okay? So you're allowed one cry in your pillow, cry to me, and then it's over.
Okay.
Focus on what you're going to do. So that would be my short answer to forgiveness.
Which is surely a long way to it. So sometimes
it's just a thought away.
Just a thought away.
Trust me, it's sometimes just a different perception. You just take them from where they are and you bring them on the other side. And trust me, generally, we don't live with villains. Our patriarchs are not villains. There are people who are doing what they think they should do best. Sometimes this is abusive. Sometimes it steps upon us. But we don't live with people who wake up in the morning and say, how am I going to make Sonia's life difficult?
Yeah, okay, I see. Okay, so I see the time and I learned a lot about. For me, I think it was very valuable to consider now inheritance not as just something that is physically or material, but something that is non-tangible, as you say. And I like the idea about the transfer of all these emotions and values from one generation to another. And I definitely have to speak again with my mother, who is joining the web interview, about the history of certain, goods that she has. So I think this is very important to learn about what is the history of the goods that she very much, or that the parents very much like or love. I think this is a takeaway I have. Also, I think what is important to, when you are in an inheritance process, to focus on two things. What is your own situation, and what is what do you want in your future? How do you see your future? And as we said, what is the value, also the intangible value of these heirlooms? So this is my takeaway, and I think, and that you offer a process about how you're doing it with the individual step by step. So I think this is very Yeah, very interesting. And for me, it's a takeaway I have today. And also, when we talk about letting go and forgiving, I think I see, and I learned it also in my life and through my professional experience, that this is something you can do on your own. You might need some help from external coaches or consultants, whatever. But I think that you can do many things on your own to have a better understanding of life, inheritance, whatever. So I
So
would like.
it's about trying to create value and happiness with what you have.
Yeah.
And somewhere at the end of it, you need to understand you can spend your energy fighting, complaining, and so on. But at the end of the day, these are days of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think that usually in our 40s and 50s, we start to become more sensitive to the days of our life. I personally I have a little jar, and I put a little pea in every day of my life. I put it in the jar. And so I can remind myself that another day of my life went by, and my days are numbered like everybody else's. And this feeling is actually a very good feeling, because it gives you a control of what you're going to expend your energy on, and what to see where the picture in a better, more clearer way. So even though we're dealing with family businesses, even if we're dealing with estates, even if we're dealing with objects, whatever it is, these are gateways to find ourself and what we value most, because that's the end result that we want, isn't it?
I think there are no more words to say, but there are surely some questions from the audience.